Hello, and thank you for tuning in to the Flatiron Syndicate Motorsports Podcast. This show is brought to you by Flatiron's Tuning, your source for any aftermarket or OEM Subaru parts. Be sure to check out our store at flatironstuning.com and stay tuned with Flatiron's Tuning. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Flatiron Syndicate Podcast. We're here in the shop. We've got Jeremy from Money Shifter Rally with us again today. And the topic of the day that we decided to talk about is taking an old car to the track. Now, I've talked to you about this, and I've wanted to talk about this with you because you have a lot of experience taking an older car to the track.
Yeah.
And what brought this back to mind for me is that, like, my Subaru, my WRX at this point is 21 years old, can literally buy alcohol. And my goal for this year is to get back out to the track, and I'm realizing that there's some things, like, just based on the age of the car, like, if I'm going to get back to the track and have the car be reliable, that there's some other things that you have to do that maybe is above and beyond what typical track day prep would be. So I thought that having a discussion about bringing that old car to the track and what some of those differences would be, things to look at, things to look for, and even the process of taking the car to the track, the mindset that you would want to have, especially the first time out, is a little bit different as the car gets 10, 15, 20 years old, believe it or not.
Yeah.
So that's where I wanted to start. So with that being said, Jeremy, what is the first thing that comes to your mind, like, of bringing an old car to the track?
Honestly, the first thing that comes to mind bringing an old car to the track for me is make sure you've got a ride home if you're not driving home from the track.
Sure.
For whatever reason.
Sure.
And that's been me. As you know, I have a bunch of older Subarus.
Yeah.
And I've had
Yeah.
a bunch of older cars in general. Like the last non-Subaru I had was a 1995 M3, right? BMW M3. That also, I like it was a track car, so
Yeah.
I took it to the track, and there's, even if you're still dailying your older Subaru, I know that you have a couple cars, so you don't drive your Bug-Eye
not nearly as much
all that often, but even if you were dailying it, there's the conditions that you get into on the racetrack are way different than the conditions you get daily driving it. So, you do run the risk of something that wasn't a problem on your commute becomes a problem after you do a hot lap.
And sometimes dailying the car is better. Like part of my thinking in this is that I have not been driving the Subaru every day. So it's one of those, like, hey, I want to take the car to the track in a couple of weeks. Hey, maybe you need to drive the car every day for a week.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Get it hot, like, get a heat cycle, like, really get it up to 10 multiple times and make sure that everything's happy, check the coolant, all that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, typical services in terms of fluids and making sure your tires are in good shape, just that stuff, which you should do for any car before you go to the track.
Yeah.
I think, as we talked about before, I'm a big fan of, quite literally, oil change before and after.
Sure.
If you're really going to be riding the car hard, which, I mean,
before and after the track day.
Before and after the track day.
Yeah.
I don't know. I see. Maybe I'm weird, but I find it impossible to be on a racetrack and not just hammer the hell out of it.
Sure.
Flat out.
Yeah.
Deep into the brake zone.
Red mist. Yeah.
Red mist. Right. So, so just as far as other things to think about, that they're not necessarily things you have to address beforehand, but just be aware that there are certain things that might break on it that aren't catastrophic, but just make it like just something to keep in mind, that you might pop a power steering hose. You might, there might be something like a leak that you knew you had, maybe a tiny bit of, like, coolant coming out of the water pump gasket, or power steering fluid leaking from the rack, that you go to the track and you're hard on the car, and that small leak where you topped up the power steering fluid every couple of months might suddenly become, okay, I can't really drive this home because it's just gushing.
Yeah, a small hidden problem that once you get it up on track, track temps, track usage, all those stresses, all of a sudden deteriorates quickly, manifests into a much bigger problem.
Right.
Can anything to do with hoses, fluids, or belts
Mm.
can surprise you on an older car when you take it to the track, especially if you haven't really been in there hands on in the last 6 months, year, 2 years to really like get a sense of what the state of
Yeah.
everything is.
So when it comes to Subarus and the turbo cars, especially, something I've noticed on every single turbo Subaru I've ever touched anything in the engine bay is that all the hoses on the turbo side of the engine, on the passenger
Yeah,
side,
yeah,
they are just
cooked.
they're cooked.
Yeah,
They're brittle. They're hard. They're dry rotted.
yeah,
Um, Especially the PCV hoses and stuff at the back. But also there's a power steering hose. The return hose runs by there. On the turbo cars, especially, those hoses are always cooked,
yeah.
and so you know that the stuff again, not necessarily something you need to go in and replace aggressively, but
But it's something to be aware of,
yeah,
and
something
this
to be
is
aware of.
this is something that happens with age with these
Mm-hmm.
rubber hoses for anything,
Yeah,
power steering, whatever.
and again, the older turbo Subarus, the EJ cars, I've seen this failure multiple times. The coolant supply hose to the engine runs
Mm.
right next to the up pipe. Right, it's the sort of you know U-shaped hose
Mm.
that has heat wrap on it from Subaru.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
That hose I have seen on two cars develop a pinhole leak
yeah,
after it gets old and you run it really hard.
yeah.
And this, in fact, in particular, before the rally car was like a full-on rally car, when it was just like
Hmm.
a hill climb and car, we were chasing a coolant leak
Yeah,
for
yeah,
ages,
yeah,
for to the point where we knew it was losing coolant, we knew it was bubbling out, and the coolant was going somewhere. We couldn't find where it was going until I used a cooling system pressure
yeah,
tester and found it just pissing out of that
yeah.
little hose.
Pressure tester. So what that is so you take off the radiator cap, and
Yeah.
it's basically it's kind of like a version of a bicycle pump. I mean
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that's the way to
that's the
think of
one
it.
I have.
So you can pump it, and you basically you're applying a little bit of pressure on top of the coolant level, basically to what your radiator
Yeah.
cap pressure would be, and then you can just hold it there. And so if you've got a leak, you're basically simulating the pressure in the system at operating
Right.
temperature. And then if you've got a leak, a lot of times that will get it to manifest
Mm-hmm.
because you're at 1.3 bars of pressure,
Right.
and then you go, aha, there it is.
Right.
Like the other gotcha there is a lot of the factory clamps, especially on the small hoses under the engine, are spring clamps. And the thing is like if you have a spring clamp and it's 10, 15 years old and it's been heat cycled a bajillion times, it kind of fatigues a little bit. It can hold a little bit less than it did when it was brand new.
Interestingly, my experience with spring clamps on OEM hoses, and I know a lot of people, a lot of us working on our cars, when we're doing something, it's like, oh, throw that crappy clamp away, it's
Yeah,
gonna leak when you're doing something. Well, those clamps, in my experience, are totally fine if you never touch them. But
can be.
as soon
Yes.
like if all your hoses are original, if you're talking about a radiator hose or something that's original and the spring clamp on it's never been touched, in my experience, those hoses can be 30 years old and they still won't leak. But as soon as you touch it, as soon as you move that clamp and move that hose,
Yeah.
the little
Yeah.
perfect
Just like a
balance,
seal.
yeah, the
Yeah.
seal that had formed
Yeah.
there over all those years is broken and you're never going to get it back. That's the
Yeah.
time when
You got.
you cut off the little rotted hose end, or you go get a new
Yeah.
piece of hose and you
Yeah.
get
Yeah.
a nice a high quality worm gear clamp, like a stainless steel one, and you put it back together that way, and
Yeah.
much more reliable.
What I was gonna say is look for any kinds of signs of like coolant, like green dust or whatever around the hose
Yeah.
clamps, which would indicate that there's like a small leak there that's been happening over time, and the coolant has
Yeah.
been burning off or something like that. Um, because it's little things like that where you daily drive the car, you got 100,000 miles on it, and it's fine the whole time, and you take it to the track and get it up to like full track temps, and then it just
Yeah,
keeps going.
and then the tiny leak becomes a more serious leak.
Yeah.
When I go to the track, if I'm thinking, I bring with me, obviously engine oil,
Yep.
power steering fluid. I bring a couple jugs of distilled water because
Oh yeah. Yeah.
on the risk that I do pop a hose and I can manage to bandage it back together, at least I can still drive the car potentially by filling it back up with just
Hmm.
distilled water. Get that at your supermarket.
Yep.
Much better than having to pee in the radiator cap or something just to
Right.
get yourself home, right?
Yeah. Extreme measures in dire circumstances.
Right.
Yes.
And also keep in mind where the track is. Like, if you're going out to High Plains Raceway, I think the nearest parts store is probably 45 minutes down the highway or something like that. I know that this happens. So they run 24 hours of Lemons races there, and one of the things that I know the organizers of the races lament is that there's no parts store. There's nothing around for miles.
Yeah.
So because it's Lemons and people blow their cars up left and right,
yeah.
then you're
you lose hours and hours.
Exactly. If you're not ready for that, then it could be a thing.
Well, and the ultimate point here is that there's a lot of things that like can on an old car that can seem like they're okay.
Yeah.
But then when you actually get it onto the track, then that's where the problem manifests. And so that's what you kind of have to have in mind as you're taking this older car to the track.
So I can imagine that this topic was inspired by some of my recent experiences on the racetrack.
Yes, that's what brought it to top of mind. Yes.
Right. So, slight recap. I have a bunch of old Subarus. Like, I have my 1992 SVX.
Yep.
That I've taken to the track a couple times, just not because it's like I can make a particularly fast time with it, but because it's a fun car to drive.
Sure.
And it was kind of built for that. It's pretty capable out of the box in terms of like performance driving, and why not, right?
Sure.
Just to see what it can do and learn where the weaknesses are. Like, sure, if you want to like, if you want to go modify your car, one of the great ways to figure out what you should modify first is by going to do a track day, or even a day with an instructor and find out what the limitations are.
Well, and that's one of the mindsets that you have that I think is valuable and is worth mentioning to folks, is that you're gonna find a weak link.
Yeah.
And so it's so easy to think like everything's gonna be just fine.
Mm-hmm.
Like we're gonna take this to the track and everything's gonna be fine, and that's what we want. But like having that, the flip side is like, all right, let's find out what the weak link is, because maybe there's one or two things, but if you can address those one or two issues, then you work through that, then you can have this older car that now becomes a reliable track tool again. But you've got to kind of do that exploratory track day or two to get kind of, work out those bugs.
So a few weeks ago now, I went to the track just with some of the other guys from the shop, and we were just hanging out really. I can't remember. I don't think we were there with the rally car testing that day, but we were just hanging out, and I decided to drive my 2001 Outback H6 LL Bean edition. Yeah. This is the one that's rear-wheel drive converted. It has a BRZ drive line in it behind the stock, completely stock, 3-liter flat 6 motor that came in that model.
Yes. More to come on that car, by the way. So stay tuned for that.
Car. Yeah. So it's not a track car or a race car by any real definition. It's
True. It's more like that than you would suspect, which is Again, we're gonna do a feature on this car specifically.
So one of the things about that car though is it's a 23-year-old Outback.
Yeah.
With I think about 170,000 miles on it.
Yeah.
And I don't know the complete service history of the car before I got it, but it was fairly well maintained for one of these. It's not rusty at all.
Right.
From the outside, it looks like it was taken care of. The interior is great. But when you get that car up on a lift, you see, okay, the shocks have been replaced. It's got lowering springs on it, but a lot of the rubber is original. A lot of it is the 23-year-old bushings, sway bar links, things like that haven't really been touched because, the last person who owned this car was, put it this way, an old person who drove to the grocery store in it, right?
And it didn't really matter that much.
Didn't really matter.
And then now we're turning it into a toy, and we're also asking it to do things that it was never really built to do exactly.
So the car has Brembos on it. It's not like super fast off the line, but I have the confidence with that car to really send it into a corner because I know it's got the brakes and it's fairly stiff. So I was sending it into the corners at High Plains, and as I was coming down what they call to hell on a bobsled on that track, which is
9 and 10,
9 and 9A, 9B, something like that, and then turn 10. Turn 10 is this right-hander.
Yeah.
It's pretty aggressive in the rally car, just with 300 treadwear tires. We were pulling like 0.85, 0.9 G's in that turn.
Okay.
So it's a fast turn.
Yeah.
And when I was coming into that turn, I started losing like stability in the rear end, and I
Mm-hmm.
could feel it, and I really didn't have a lot of options on what to do other than try to turn in a little more aggressively because the car wasn't rotating, and I ended up 180ing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then after I got off the track because I knew something was wrong, I look it over and I realized, the toe, the toe of the wheels, how straight the
Yeah.
wheels are pointing
Yeah.
in the rear
Yeah.
was a little off. More like
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
car was a little cross-eyed
Yeah. Yeah.
in the back,
Yep.
and but nothing was loose that I could feel like in terms of like something had broken catastrophically. And I just driving around the paddock, there wasn't any really strange like noises or problems that I felt like, okay, I broke, a spring or a
Yeah.
link or something like that. But when I got under the car and looked at it, I could see really clearly that one of the multi-link arm bushings, the one that connects the front of the arm to the body of the car,
Okay.
the bushing was basically just completely destroyed.
Yeah.
Like the rubber had ripped all apart and it was kind of floating in there.
Yep.
So, and then I had to drive the car home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What? Oh boy. Well, in so suspension bushings is
Yeah.
another. We haven't talked about that, but that's the other key piece. Well, and brakes. I mean, really, all of the systems are important, but you're going to probably put the suspension bushings and chassis under stresses that it is not in.
Yeah.
So you might not have noticed that this bushing is coming apart. Could well be that under the stress on the track, that's what actually tore the thing apart.
Yeah. I mean, I was asking a lot more from
Yep.
the car.
Yep.
In terms of, I was asking, like, I was putting forces on the suspension that it hadn't seen. And High Plains has a lot of right hand turns.
Yep.
And I don't think it's a coincidence that it was the left bushing, the left rear.
Yeah.
That's the one that fully ripped apart.
It's always going to get loaded up.
Because it was getting really loaded up when I was sending it into those corners.
And that's something that would happen, that could potentially happen. And it could be something where you've driven this car for 100,000 miles and you've never had an issue, you've never seen this problem, and the bushings have just kind of been breaking down a little bit.
Yeah.
But then now it's this amount of stress that actually tips the scales to the failure.
So bad bushings are one of those things that if you can get under your car, drive it up on ramps, or lift it up with your floor jack, you can see the warning signs.
Yeah,
cracks in them,
any kind of shiny spots where something has been moving around and rubbing where it shouldn't.
Yeah. Also, there's a lot of cars which have liquid filled engine mounts.
Oh yeah.
So this is another thing you can look at is there's bushings that mount your engine and your transmission to the chassis, obviously. Yeah. Looking at those and seeing if there's cracks in them, if there's flakes and bits coming off of them.
Yeah.
Think of what happens when you have an old dried pencil eraser.
Yeah.
And it'll crack and crumble in your fingers, right? So, in fact, I think we should get some pictures of some bad bushings because I'm quite sure I have some pictures on my phone that we can insert into the into the stream here.
And this happens more often than you would think.
Yeah.
And it could be something where, I mean, it happened actually on our minivan a while ago where I was doing brakes on it and I realized how just completely shot the front control arm bushings were.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh well, that's why the steering is a little bit vague and inconsistent. Mm-hmm. And replace them and it feels like a whole new car.
So and these are these are things that different cars have different problem areas too.
Yep.
So, one of my daily drivers is a 2010 Outback.
Yeah.
And they are famous. So the 2010 to 2014 Legacy and Outback cars are really famous for a really vague steering shake thing that happens on highway speed. Sometimes while you're braking, sometimes while you're turning, you're going to feel a little like shimmy in the steering wheel. Okay. And it's the front control arm bushings almost every time. Okay, those Outbacks as well as the 2008 and newer Impreza WRXs.
Yeah.
They switched to a different kind of front control arm bushing and stuff.
It's a donut.
Yeah.
It's a donut that's got the bolt that goes through to connect it to the chassis comes through the center of the donut, and they put voids in that rubber.
Yeah.
And the wonkiest part of that, and that's the same design as on our Toyota minivan and a lot of other cars.
Yeah.
And the problem is they put voids in the rubber, and the resting position of the control arm is twisted.
Yeah.
So they're purposely twisting this rubber bushing with material removed and basically leaving it. It's kind of like if you took a rubber band and you're always holding it stretched. That's what is going on with these.
Yeah.
bushings.
So those control arm bushings, I mean, they're fine as parts, but they do fail more quickly than the bushings on a GD. Yeah. So those are more of a wear item on the 2008 and newer cars than they were on the older cars.
And this is on the Legacy GT from 2005 to 2009. That's where it's the same bushing, and that's where we started seeing a lot of issues with it.
Right. Yeah. Especially because those are an example of a part that would even as it was starting to degrade and be past sort of its life, it would still hold together on a daily driver. But as soon as you take it to a track and you put forces on the front of it,
it's locked in place.
Yeah.
Like the bolts and all the supporting pieces, the control arm is not going to fall off. Like there are redundancies to make it so that you're never going to lose complete control of the car.
Right.
But you can get this vagueness and inconsistency in the steering.
And that's perhaps one of those things that have I driven on the highway, driven to work or something with a car that I know pulls to the left a little bit.
Sure.
Oh
yeah, and you can ignore stuff like that when you're driving it on the street every day. Where it's not a critical failure. It's not something where it's a dramatic safety issue. But now you take this car to the track, you could tip that bushing over way past its failure point, have some issues, and the stakes of just like you described, the stakes of having that kind of a failure on track when you're really loading up the suspension are higher.
Yeah.
Because the stresses are higher, the speeds are higher.
Yeah.
So that's where if you've got an older car and you've got any of these little weird niggling issues, it's kind of better to go in there and address it rather than go like, it's going to be fine. I'm just going to send it, because it could get exponentially worse once you get it on track.
Right. On older cars, every single, I feel like with just maybe a couple of exceptions, every single car that anybody has that I look at, the brake fluid looks like crap in it. Right. I mean, that's brake fluid is supposed to be, according to the service manuals for most Subarus, it's supposed to be checked every 30,000 miles and replaced every 60. If I remember correctly.
I want to say it's replaced every 30 and checked every 2 years.
You might be right about that, actually. I'm sorry. Yeah, I think you're right. I think it is replace. Yeah, depending on the year, sometimes they say inspect versus replace. But
yeah, they've done that. Yeah.
Yeah, but no, I don't want to put out numbers without having the sheet in front of me. But
yeah,
brake fluid is something that I know a lot of people who are meticulous owners of their cars who. They do their oil change every 3,000 miles. They do it themselves. They always use high quality oil and filters. They check their fluid levels. How's my coolant, all that stuff. But unless they didn't check the brake fluid, and honestly, they probably didn't spend that much time with the literal instruction manual that comes for the car that says, "Hey, every 30,000 miles, you should be checking this off."
Well, and what does check it mean? I mean, it's like, well, the brakes work fine. You don't have any issues. It must be okay. We definitely recommend putting in a higher temp fluid, because .3, you can very quickly exceed its boiling point at the track, for one. If it's old .3, you can basically nuke that fluid in half a lap.
I can tell you, I have nuked old .3 on the racetrack in half a lap.
And if you have any kind of, there could just be weird issues with brakes once you get old.
That's true.
Calipers that stick, that sort of thing, where you can have weird braking issues come up on track, and suspension. Like, I want to go back just real quick to the struts themselves, because if the struts fail, there's oil in the strut, and then there's a nitrogen gas over it. If the seals fail, you can actually start to see some of that oil come out. or if the car just tends to be bouncy in general,
Yeah.
that indicates that probably your struts are not
Yeah.
working anymore.
Failed struts are annoying to test as a DIYer because the correct way to check if a strut's like blown or not for sure
Like take it off the
is
car.
take it off the car, take the hat and the spring off of it, and
Yeah.
compress it and see if it
rebounds.
resists, if it resists and rebounds.
Yeah.
And that's annoying to do. It's especially because
at that point,
I don't know anybody who likes using a spring compressor.
No.
And at that point, you might as well just have bought another strut
Yes.
and put your spring back together
Yeah.
and been all good to go, right? So, but yeah, if literally just going to the strut top in your car and shoving all your body weight down on it and seeing how much it bounces.
Well, and if you've driven the car and you've hit like a little dip or something like that, does the car just like dip and come right back up, or does it kind of dip and bounce a time or two? Any kind of that bouncing, the damper, that's what it's supposed to do, is to remove the bounce. Like, so if you hit bumps and you know, oh yeah, the rear of my car, it kind of bounces a little bit.
Yeah, and like also you can sometimes see fluid leaking from them, but not always. The 2013 WRX I bought it with I think 98,000 miles on it, and the front struts were blown. You could tell. In fact, every time I pulled out of my driveway, the car would nosedive in the ground. It was that bad. So, but they didn't look like they were blown. There was no seepage of oil out of them or anything like that. But I just was like, okay, I got out my spring compressor and I just put new struts in it instead, as opposed to worrying about it. And now it drives fine.
And I think the overall message I would have with suspension is any kind of wear issues or things that feel like that, it's going to give you inconsistent handling, where you do one thing and it works well the first time and then it doesn't the second time. And the danger of that the first time you take the car to the track is the second time when it does something wonky. I mean, that's where you could spin the car, go off track, and it just the danger kind of like escalates from there depending.
So something occurs to me. You've had your bug eye since fairly new.
Reasonably, yes.
Yeah, and you've had bug eyes since they were new, right? I've never driven a low miles stock bug eye. I like every single bug eye I've owned. Has been in some way messed with.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
And high miles. Like I think the last one I had like 220 on the clock or something like that on it. Who knows how many engines and stuff.
Sure.
Let's put it this way. It was one of those cars where when I got it, I was finding all the little cut wire ends for where the underglow had previously been on it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I remember that time.
So the way it drove, I mean, it had some combination of eBay parts and who knows what on it. So the way it drove that's the way this car drives. I don't know how it was supposed to drive.
Sure. Yeah. Well, and so the flip side of all of this is that, well, you want to find the weakest link. Yeah. Like, how bad is the handling?
Sure.
Like, is the handling worse than the power? Like, where do you want to put your time and energy into making the car better if you've got something that's older that you're going to go through and take it to the track? So, like, you could certainly take the car to the track to shake it down and find out what that weak link is, or how good or bad the car might be. But if you do that, like with everything we've talked about here that could go wrong, think about, okay, well, how do I deal with any one of these problems if this is what crops up?
Yeah.
This is where, like, if you can trailer the car to the track and drive it, brilliant. Because if something breaks, you push it on the trailer and you go home and you go like, wow.
Or just be
found the weak link.
Yeah, or just be, like I said, go with friends so that you can get a ride to a parts store or get a ride home if you have to. After you pop a power steering hose or a coolant hose. Heck, there's something I keep in most of my turbo cars. Actually, well, not most of them, but a couple of my cars that I've had issues with the power steering is I keep a second alternator belt that's shorter than the regular one, so that I can literally take the belt off the power steering, just put on a belt that loops the crankshaft and the alternator, so that I can run, like I can drive the car without power steering.
Wow.
And I have done that because I once had a power steering pump fail on me catastrophically while I was driving a large distance.
Oh boy.
Sure. So that's I can't give you the part number because I don't remember, but it's basically you can go to a parts store and get a belt that's shorter than just short enough to go around the
Okay.
alternator of the crankshaft. We carry one of those as a spare in the rally car too,
Okay. Yeah.
because we've lost the power steering on a rally car too. And if you need to keep like, you can drive without power steering. You can't don't try to drive more than 15 minutes without
An
like an
alternator.
alternator belt
Yeah.
at all,
Yeah. True.
because yeah, it'll just quit on you at some
Yeah.
point randomly.
Yeah.
Uh,
You'll take out your battery too, driving without the alternator.
exactly right.
But I mean, so you can do this. It's just you've got to kind of know what you're doing and what your priorities are and what
Yeah.
your mentality is. And the other thing I would argue is that going that first time or two to the track with the car is realize that here's a lot of things we've talked about that you could possibly run into. Well, go easy. Like if you can, don't go 10 tenths. Don't push it too hard. Bring it up gradually until you get some build up some experience or confidence that all right, the braking system seems to work, the suspension seems to be behaving consistently, not anything weird, and
That
then
that's the ideal, but
it's hard to
I
do.
I
It's
have
hard to do.
I know I have this problem. I don't know how to do anything less than 10 tenths
Okay.
on a racetrack, and
Okay.
I've been in the car with people who don't know how to do anything less than 10 tenths on the racetrack.
Most people can't do less than 10
It's
tenths.
yeah, it's really
impressive.
hard. It's because it's really fun.
Yeah.
It's
Oh
like
yeah.
you're on a back street. And you're like, okay, what's the top speed that I can get up to now? Or
Yeah.
you're like, or you turn in, you brake early and turn in on a corner, and you're like, man, I could have taken that so much faster. I feel
Yeah.
like I'm slow compared to the Miata that's
Yeah.
passing me on the left right now.
Right. Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's just the mindset. The
Mhm.
mindset is the last piece of the puzzle to kind of know what you're going to the track for. The other thing I would say is if you have an issue, way better to just stop
Yeah.
and go home versus like think, this isn't that big of a deal. I'm going to keep pressing through this. Hopefully, this is one of those self-healing problems that the car will just resolve it on its
So,
own.
so my experience with that is if you're taking a newer car to the track, the issues you're going to encounter are much more of the sort of, well, I guess it's time to go home problems. Like, wow, my coolant temp got really hot after 2 laps. I guess I can't really do it hot a lot. My oil temp got
Sure,
really hot.
sure.
Now, in my experience, if it's an older car and get hard on it and something breaks, yeah,
Well, you
you're
can.
probably the drive home is not going to be the same as the drive there
True,
was.
true. And if you drive the car to the track, that I mean that's
Yeah.
yeah. I guess what I would say is, because this has been my experience the last couple times, is if anything weird starts to happen,
Yeah.
don't go back on track. Far better. So the weird things that happen to me is smoke on startup.
Mm.
Then like the months ago or years ago, I went to the track and it was years ago at this point, and I basically started having smoke coming out of the car on right hand turns after like 3 laps. Now this is way back to the beginning where I tested the catch can where it had filled up, but that was a weird problem at the time, and I had to come home and figure all that out. Um, just if something weird crops up, like the check engine light comes on and it's a weird code that doesn't make any sense or that you don't know what it is,
Honestly, check engine light comes on at all,
yeah, probably
probably time to
yeah.
stop.
Don't push because it's not gonna get better.
Right.
And like if you go in
And
with the mentality of like,
yeah.
hey, I'm gonna go, we're gonna drive, we're gonna see what happens, but if anything weird happens, that's
Mm.
where we're gonna end the day. That's a good mentality to have, especially if it's an older car that you're taking to the track the first time, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I'm fully a fan of driving the car to the track. I think you should do that. Sure.
It's totally doable.
It's
That's what
just
I've always done.
honestly, well, if I had to like, if I own a trailer, and even then, if I had to use a trailer every time I went to the track, I
Mm,
would just not be driving there as much. Just because
yeah.
it's not just because it's more annoying.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and you can always
and
get a
I own
tow
a
truck,
trailer.
and especially at a track. Yeah, there's been a you're not going to
Yeah,
go to there's no track that a tow truck has never been to.
yeah,
Like that, there will be a way to get the car home if
yeah,
needs be, if
yeah.
something comes up.
I don't
So
know. I don't know how many people in this day and age like have AAA or some kind of roadside assistance. I've never done this myself, but I have heard stories of, well, it broke on the track, so I'm just gonna now have my buddy pull the car out to just outside the track.
I
when the
can I
tow
can
truck.
neither confirm nor deny that I've heard of this happening before.
Yeah.
But eh,
Yeah.
sometimes you get creative. So,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, all right. Well, I shudder to ask this question because we're getting towards the end, but it's worth mentioning
Yeah.
for a track car, and you kind of alluded to this earlier. Like I could hear people thinking, one, why would you take an old car to the track? Wouldn't a
Mm.
new car be more reliable? Well, what do you think? Is taking a new car to the track always going to be more reliable than taking an old car to the track, or are there some pros and cons to both?
Yeah. So, I mean, for me, new car versus old car, it's literally what am I driving today in
Mm-hmm.
general? Like, what do I
Sure.
have in my little parking lot that I feel like driving and seeing the limits of what would be cool to drive? Um, and as but at the same time, like I've also been like, okay, I got this brand new 2021 STI. I want to go to the track and see what it does.
Yeah.
So I've had fun with both, right?
Sure. Oh,
A lot
sure.
of fun with both. And they had different problems. Like
Yeah.
the brand new STI, the first problem I had was that, so it wasn't a literal problem, it was just like a kind of problem, was that the, the instructor, so I wasn't taking classes that day. I was there with my M3 and my partner was there with her STI, and she was taking classes, and
Mm.
the instructor was like, "Oh, I usually don't like to teach students in Subarus, especially STIs, because sometimes they blow up."
Oh boy. Okay. Okay.
And he had this sort of he's like, "Oh, in my experience, maybe it's not the best car to start learning to drive in."
Mm.
And you know what, I know enough about Subarus, and I also know it's a basically a bone stock, off the
Yeah.
assembly line STI. It should
Yeah.
be fine.
Yeah.
This is a car that's designed to do
Sure.
hard driving on track.
Sure.
It should be fine, but maybe there's something I don't know about this car that he knows because of his
Mm.
experience. Maybe
Yeah.
there's something
Okay.
about this car at this track that
Sure.
certain people have hurt them. So that's that. Is like, what if it's a brand new, if it's a new car, there's like more of a, ooh, oh, I don't want to break this. It's going to be expensive and it's all new, and the engine's
Sure.
only got X
That is a
number of
factor.
miles on it. Like,
100%.
so
Yeah.
there, but on the
Man,
other hand,
I remember I was at a
yeah,
track day with a guy that had a very new STI that there was a concrete there was like a generator or something in the pavement where they had like those concrete posts to protect it.
okay.
So you went back into it and he found one of those posts.
Mm.
It was just that was just brutal. Like just
Yeah,
crunched. It was like but I mean that could happen in any parking
yeah,
lot. It just happened to be a track. But,
sure, yeah. I mean, it can happen anywhere, but like when most of my older cars like are not worth a lot of money, quote unquote, right?
sure, sure.
So if
Less at stake.
so yeah, less at
Yeah.
stake. I mean, honestly, would I be heartbroken if I sent my SVX flying into a wall? Yeah,
Yeah.
I would be heartbroken. But to be honest, it's not a lot of money that I like went up in smoke there. I can go buy another cheap SVX,
Sure. Well,
right?
and
Because
part of the motivation for this is
yeah,
there's so many people that are now buying old Subarus to make into track toys. It makes
right.
sense. Well, if you get like what Viet's Bug Eye, like you got it
Yeah.
for a
Uh,
song and just sure like throw some parts on it, take it to the track, whatever happens happens, no big
yeah.
deal.
But I was going to point out that if you send your brand new 2022 WRX, which is a great track car from my perspective, you send that into a wall at the racetrack. Unfortunately, your insurance company is not going to pay
Yeah,
for
no,
that.
not at all.
And
Yeah.
body damage, is expensive to fix.
Oh,
So
especially when you're paying out of pocket. And
yeah,
I have seen that actually a time or two. It doesn't happen that often, but boy, yeah, that sucks.
right. And so that is something to consider, that if you're taking like if it's, especially if it's your only car and it's a
Yeah.
newer car, you might be in a situation where you owe more money on the car than it's worth now, because unfortunately, Miata teamboat you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just
Well,
something to keep in mind.
mm,
Which I'm not trying to tell people again not to go drive on the racetrack, but just keep in mind that maybe the hell, if there's somebody aggressive in the heat driving with you,
I would say
keep that in mind too.
if you have a new car, going instead of
Yeah.
just going to an open track day, going with an organization like
Right.
NASA where there's a lot more structure,
Right.
where there's going to be a lot less just random events happening in the track.
Mm-hmm.
Like NASA is really good about running an organized event where you're going to be on track with people that are similar skill levels, instructors,
That's a
and
good point.
guidance and rules to keep it so that like something weird happening is
And
pretty
you can
minimal.
get track day insurance at those kinds of events that are
Right.
more structured. And
Right.
if it's a newer car, you can get track day insurance.
Yeah.
If you show, if I've looked into this, like it's not economical if it's even possible to get track day insurance on like an old classic
Yeah. No.
car or something
It's
like
half the
that.
cost of the car.
Right, exactly. Sometimes. So yeah, that's what I
Well,
think about driving a newer car
to
personally.
switch it to a happier thing, a lot of times these newer cars, kind of like what you're alluding to with some of these direct injected cars or whatnot,
Mm-hmm.
where you getting it on track, getting up to temperature, using it in that way, if the car wasn't really designed to do that, you could get into a limit quickly with the cars. And so that's where some of these new systems, I'm thinking
Yeah.
the Focus RS here was notorious for overheating.
Mm.
When we were working with Pettiford, when he had his, he could only do a lap and a half before the car went into limp mode because the oil temps were overheating or the coolant temps were overheating or both of them were overheating. It was just that car, it basically had a lap in it and that was it.
The newer WRXs have oil temp sensors in them
Mm-hmm.
that you can look at on the dashboard, and I think that's a great feature to have.
Yeah, for sure.
On a car. And I think that if you're at a track day, I wouldn't have the boost gauge up on my screen. I'd have the oil temp gauge up
Sure.
on my screen,
Yeah.
so I know that okay, it's a stock car without like an external oil cooler or something. Maybe a couple laps and it's hot enough that you want to cool down.
Well, I bring this up just to say, like some of these modern cars, like the cars are so much more complicated. They have so many more things that the ECU is looking at. You can get into a fringe case on track because that's not what 95% of the people that buy these cars do with them. If it's a really performance oriented car, probably not, like a BMW M car or whatnot.
Right.
But I mean, that could be another thing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like taking a brand new car to the track is a guarantee that you're going to have a trouble-free, fun motoring day of going 10/10 and all that sort of thing.
Yeah. I don't know what else to say about that.
Well, it's just to be aware of, and it's not an absolute guarantee. But I mean, you asked, or you said that you've never had a new bug eye. When I had my O2 bug eye back in 03 and took it to the track, I drove it straight to the track, drove it on the track, 10/10 all day. At least what was 10/10 for me at the time. I had a blast and just drove it home. Never had an issue.
Yeah.
And it was just an absolute blast. So like, it can absolutely be that trouble-free motoring experience. It's just not 100% guaranteed. And I think overall, I would say anytime you go to the track, you've got to kind of have it in that mindset of like, especially the first session of the day. It's like that's really just like, let's get everything up to temp. Let's get the cobwebs out of the driver's head. Let's just get everything up to speed, up to temperature, and see what happens, and then kind of evaluate how you want to approach the day after that.
Yeah.
New car or old. That's always a good starting point.
I think I haven't driven my Baja much recently because it's there's some things I have to fix on it that make it not great to drive, like the exhaust being broken in the middle makes it very loud.
Right.
So I recently did a little bit of work on it, and I needed to move it on my property. So instead of just going from point A to point B, I decided to go rip around the neighborhood and get a feel for what's going on with the car still. And I remembered a bunch of things just after driving it or while driving it for a couple minutes. I was like, wow, I forgot this is also broken. Yeah. Oh, and this is not what I remember it was supposed to be doing. And oh, right, that. Yeah. When you haven't driven a car in a while, you might forget exactly what the state it was that you left it in. And we have this problem with the race car all the time.
Oh, yeah. Man, and geez. Yeah. The cars do not like to sit. No. And like in my mind, because I haven't been driving my bug eye a lot, that's where, again, I'm like, man, I need to get this. I just need to start driving it a bunch.
Yeah.
Because you may, just time in and of itself may have like changed the game a little bit.
Honestly, I think the problem for me is that time makes me forget
it's
what
both.
was going on.
It's maybe it's one or the other. Either my memory is shot or the car is getting more feeling finicky, neglected and or both. I think they both. I think that's where there's a happy medium in the middle. But overall, I mean, I think you can absolutely, no matter if it's a brand new car, an old car, still have fun at the track day. I think
Mhm.
it's just having a good mindset going in is important. And
Yeah. So
yeah,
I have a couple bullet points.
yes,
Old cars at the track. So we're talking even honestly, 10-year old. My WRX is 10 years old. It's
yeah,
2013.
yeah,
That's old in the sense
11,
that, yeah, 11 years old.
yeah,
Yeah, it's more than 10 years. So old car at the track, including the 2013 WRX.
yeah.
If you don't remember the last time you changed your brake fluid, you should
You should
flush it.
change the point.
You
Yeah,
should change the brake fluid,
yeah,
and that means opening the bleeders at the back, pumping all the brake fluid out, basically just bleeding a whole bottle of brake fluid. Go to the parts store or go to Flatirons Tuning and buy, one of these. What are they? Pints? No,
multiple or
the
pints.
pony.
Yeah,
Buy a
yeah,
pint bottle of brake
yeah.
fluid, and that should be enough to basically run
Two,
2 pints.
two pints. The
Yeah,
capacity of the system in most Subarus is 2 pints.
is it?
So if you want to
Oh wow,
completely
I
replace
didn't know.
everything,
Two
it's
pints.
two.
So get the
Yeah,
the 2 pints of brake fluid and run it through the whole system, and start at the back and then do the front, and pay attention to how it bleeds too, because one of the issues I've found with the
mm,
older cars is that the master cylinders in the brake system do not work, don't work as well as they used to.
mm.
I mean, think about it. There's rubber seals in those things that dry up and fail over time.
Yeah, they don't like to sit.
They don't like to sit, and honestly, they're just old. Nowadays, if I'm working, so I just did a complete brake retrofit on my SVX. I
Hmm.
equipped it with Brembos because track driving
Yeah,
showed me it needed bigger brakes.
right, right.
uh, I didn't even, I didn't even, decide, think about, oh, should I, is the master cylinder? I threw the master cylinder out and I bought a
Mm,
brand new one, which I was still
okay.
able to get. And I bled the whole system freshly
Yeah.
because I've already had the experience many times of an older car, like even a Bug Eye. Oh, I go to
Yeah.
replace the front calipers and the master cylinder is just not pushing the fluid through them. It doesn't bleed it out
Yeah.
effectively.
Yeah.
So, if you don't remember the last time you did your brake fluid, you should flush your brake fluid.
Sure.
And you should consider that if the master cylinder in the car is original and it's a 20-year-old car, that master cylinder probably doesn't work correctly anymore. Those things have a service life.
They do, and it's dependent. The functionality is dependent on rubber seals being in good
Yeah.
condition. One of the like if the fluid in the reservoir itself is really dark and cloudy,
Yes.
if you look down in it with the flashlight and there's chunks of something in
Yeah.
it, that's
Yeah.
not
If you,
great.
if you see the like the green moldy crap at the bottom of it
Yeah.
too. Yeah.
The other telltale sign is when you're at a stop, if the brake pedal drifts to the floor.
Right.
That's basically
Right.
a big indicator that the master cylinder is
Right.
failing.
So that's a good one.
Yeah.
Second one is every Subaru ever that I've ever owned, at some point, the O ring on the supply side of the power steering pump starts to fail.
Oh yeah.
Dries
Yep.
out, shrinks, whatever happens.
Yep.
And telltale sign is you start the car in a cold morning and you hear a kind of whine coming from the
Yeah.
pump, right? It's a pretty common
Well,
problem.
yeah.
Yeah. So my personal experience with that in track driving is that when that O-ring is not very good, it might just be like seeping when you
Mhm.
drive the car on a daily basis. But as soon as you get the power steering fluid really hot,
And
which
you're going like
and you're
hard
going like
turn to
this,
hard
which
turn. Yeah.
power steering fluid can get really hot, especially
Okay.
in a
Yeah.
Subaru, which doesn't have a power steering cooler in most of
Right.
them.
Right.
As soon as you start really taxing the power steering system, that little whine might come back, and you might start sucking air into the pump, and you'll notice that the steering isn't is a little jerky, maybe, or
Yeah.
not working as effectively. As soon
Yeah.
as that happens, as soon as you hear that whine, you're actually damaging the pump.
Yeah.
You're sucking air into it, and you're
It's
causing
cavitating.
you're cavitating it. You're causing wear to happen to the impellers and
Yep.
putting metal into the fluid and all
Yep.
that stuff. So if you look at your power steering pump and you see a little, like, sort of oil slick of gunk all over that the top of the pump where the
Yeah.
the hose goes into it, you should service that. You should maybe get a
Yeah.
new hose and get a new O-ring and make sure that you don't have that leak happening there, because that's one problem that will get a lot worse
For
with
sure.
track driving.
All
Servicing
right.
the brake system, checking to make sure your power
Yeah.
steering system's not leaking in a way that will get worse.
Yeah.
Number three is uh, you're not gonna like necessarily leak out all your oil at the racetrack, but
Always bring more oil.
if you have, you know, if you have blow by in your engine, you might notice that
With
intense driving is gonna
with any
cost.
car,
Yeah,
fluid wise,
yeah,
especially oil though,
right.
but you get the car on track, you're driving it at full throttle more time, you're getting it up to really high temperatures. You don't know what's going to happen. Have extra
Have extra oil with
fluids.
you. Yeah,
Be prepared to kind of like
right.
that's one of the things that the first time you take the car to the track, you're going to have to explore
Yeah.
because that's not something that you will not know what exactly is going to happen until you actually do it.
You know what's another thing that nobody ever changes in their car? Well, turbo Subarus probably this changes more often than in other makes because simply because we need engines so damn often. But
Air filters.
no, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Coolant.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, especially if you have I mean, hopefully there's no like uh, concentrate coolant car like the older Subarus. Hopefully there's no green coolant car out there that still has the original coolant in it by this point.
Probably not.
Probably
Well,
not.
that they still it's still. I mean, you can still get green
Right,
coolant that's
but
full strength. You know.
right, but that's a isn't that like a 50,000 mile coolant or something like that, or even less than that? It's a short interval.
Is 2 years.
Yeah,
I think it was 30 or 60,000 miles that they were saying to replace the green
I don't remember what the replacement interval is, but yeah, coolant is something that the car wants replaced pretty frequently.
coolant. Well, yeah.
Yeah.
What can happen is the pH of the coolant can change as it ages.
Yeah.
And on an aluminum engine, this is one of in theory, this is why you only want to run Subaru coolant in Subarus, is because it's got some additives in it to try and preserve the pH and prevent it from getting, I think it's acidic, basically where it can start eating away the aluminum.
Right. Not to mention, yeah, I mean, corrode
Yeah.
effectively the engine from
Well,
inside out.
there's definitely
and
a
the
corrosion
radiator.
inhibitor in it.
Right.
But in especially if exhaust gas gets into it, I think it might actually turn basic, but it basically if you get the exhaust gas into the coolant, then it can change and then it can really start to deteriorate some of the aluminum surfaces.
Right. And well, actually, exhaust gas is acidic, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
I'm not a chemist.
Probably acidic.
So
Yeah.
but the key here is that a degrading cooling system with gunk in it
Oh
uh,
yeah.
plugs up your radiator,
Yeah.
and that's I mean the in a way the reason that corrosion is a risk to the engine is not because like the engine is going to melt, but because the particulates generated by that kind of corrosion and degradation of the coolant is going to plug up the radiator or plug
It
up
can
some part of the cooling system.
cause issues. Wherever you
Yeah,
want.
right. So yeah, I mean that's definitely uh
It's one of these things where
something
you kind of have to take the car to the track and get it up to temp to find these things.
Mhm.
But you've got to be ready for the fact that you're going to find these things.
Yeah.
Like that's the ultimate takeaway here. Is and when you do find them, be ready for it.
When's the last time your bug eye had a coolant exchange?
When the engine went in, which was at this point 10 years ago. Well, what I've realized is so this all right.
Yeah.
So this is at the tail end for those of you who stuck around. I have a Gates timing belt set up on my car, but it's because it's so old. This is back when Gates was using the good Japanese components and everything like that. I've only driven maybe 30,000 miles since that was put on, but I realized it's now 10+ years.
Yeah.
If I'm going to start trying the car, I need to go in there and replace all the timing components from time, not from mileage.
Yeah.
Because it's like just the age of all the components is so old. And of course, the thing that really brought that home to me is I now have a pulley that's squeaking. So it's like it's time to go in.
So you've got quite a list.
I have a lot of stuff to do.
We've got timing belt service.
Yeah.
Coolant exchange.
Well, I mean, you have to take the radiator out.
Yeah. Gearbox service probably.
Well, yes, I've talked about it enough. 6 speeds going in. So yeah, as soon as
if you weren't replacing the transmission, definitely a gearbox service.
Yeah, rear diff transmission.
Yeah. Oil and filter. Hopefully that's that's the brainer. Checking for your power steering leaks. The pressure hoses on the older cars? They
I
start to
actually
leak?
replaced them because I had a leak,
Yeah,
and
there
so
you go.
I had to replace them. I can't even. Time just it
Yeah.
has evaporated. So I don't know. It's like, I would say probably 4 or 5 years ago I had to replace them.
Mm.
So and fortunately because I haven't driven it a ton and I've done like all the AOS catch can and all that stuff, all the PCV hoses are in good shape. The coolant
That's good.
hoses are somewhat recently done. But I mean, it's like basically I've been through this car and replaced everything at least once, if not twice now,
Mhm.
and I'm realizing, well, if I want to really start tracking this car again, I've got to go through and do all of the stuff again.
Yeah.
Touch all the stones, as it were. Make sure all the hoses are in good shape before I
Which,
can.
what a no, we don't think about this a lot, but cars need a lot of maintenance over their lifetime. A
They do.
car, my
Yeah.
SVX by the service manual should have had, like four timing belts by now,
Right.
right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, you're not wrong. Yeah. It's you know, I want to have good experiences going to the track, and I don't have a truck and trailer, so I'm going to be driving to the track a lot
Right.
probably. So I want to have a good drive to and from the track, and
Mm.
be able to have fun at the track as well. So it's worth going through and doing all this stuff. So yeah, it's high on the agenda, and we're going to document a lot of it. Actually, that's the
Yeah.
plan anyway. So yeah, cool. Well, I think we've covered it. So thanks very much to you for watching. Thanks for your support as always. Make sure you check out Jeremy Money Shift Rally, and you know what? If you've listened to the end, if you're already at this point, let us know in the comments. Hashtag old car. Hashtag new car.
I
Which
also,
do you think?
if you got stories about breaking your old car on the track, I'd love to hear about that
Oh yeah.
because I'm curious if anybody's broken as many cars as I have at this point.
If you got it, leave it in the comments below or email it to us at the contact us link. Because
Yeah.
in our newsletter we do a customer feature. If you've got a picture or a good story,
Yeah.
it might end up in a newsletter.
I mean, we're just hearing about one of your customers who's got a almost 40-year-old XT.
Yeah.
That he rally crosses.
Yeah.
That's basically a track event. So.
Yeah. Yeah, there you go. Absolutely.
Good.
So thanks again to everybody. Thanks for your support. And until next time, stay tuned with Flatirons Tuning. Thanks everyone for tuning in to the Flatiron Syndicate Motorsports Podcast. Once again, we'd like to let you know that your support is what makes this show possible. Be sure to check out our online store at flatironstuning.com for any of your aftermarket or OEM Subaru parts needs. And as always, stay tuned with Flatirons Tuning.